You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Lian Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And the next way you can walk that path is by joining our brand new crucible, Waking the Wild Medicine. This is for you if you know you came here to do important, much needed work, but despite all the years of seeking, you still haven't discovered exactly what it is. You're clear on what you came here to do, but the normal ways of doing business just don't feel aligned to you and maybe aren't working that well either. You've been successful creating a living doing something else, but you know your soul is now calling you towards something much deeper. Or if you're already doing your precious soul work, but you know you are now ready to create a previously undreamed of level of impact with it. You'll be joining a potent, intimate circle of sovereign men and women, each of you feeling the call to embody and express your soul work. We'll be harnessing divine archetypes, real magic, and deep embodied rituals to aid you in the reclamation and actualization of the gifts of your wild medicine. If you're feeling called to this journey, if 2021 is the year you will embody and express your deepest soul work, a great place to start is to watch the replay of our webinar on how to be your wild medicine. You can find the link to that at primalhappiness.co/medicine. And if you already know you're ready, if you know you are meant to be joining us, you can claim your place there too. And now into this week's show. It's my all the everything, where I jam on an incredibly eclectic mix of topics. This is where you can get up close and personal with me, get inside my head and see what I've been up to and I'm thinking about. Also airs live on Facebook on the first Friday of every month, usually at 10:30 a.m. UK time. In this episode, I dive deep into what I've been consuming, what I've been creating, and then into the main topic, how to go into your shadow to find the gold. It doesn't get much juicier than that. I talked about what I mean when I say shadow, what I mean by gold, and how you can walk the path to find it. Sounds good? Let's jump in. Welcome to November's All the Everything. And this month, I'm going to be talking about, as ever, what I've been consuming, creating, and then we're going to go deep into an incredibly gorgeous topic, how to go into shadow to find the gold. And so I'm probably going to go quickly through the consumption and creation part, just because the other one is such a big topic. And even if I gave the whole time to it, I could only really still scratch the surface. So we will move quickly through what I've been up to in the last month. So starting with what I've been consuming. And there's a couple of things I want to talk about, actually. And again, both briefly. One is a book that I've been reading. In fact, I'm now on a second book by the same person. I don't know how to pronounce his name, Dean Radin. Maybe. And the book that I'm going to recommend of the two, although I could probably recommend both, is one called Real Magic. And for me, on my journey of making conscious magic, the mystery, us as ultimate creators, there was a real blockage that I've had and probably still have to a degree, although that's really lessening, was this sense of it can't really be true. And this book has come at such a good time because it's a real distillation overview of the history of magic, the, I guess, shadow of magic, the way it's been repressed and denied, and then looking at it from a science perspective, why that's been something that has been hard to study. When we do see any evidence of magic, why that's kind of denied and ridiculed. But what the experiments are actually showing. So, and when I say the word magic, he uses the word magic, and clearly I use the word magic, but we could be calling that the paranormal or psi or, any of those other ways that we can describe it. But basically, the book for me was so timely in this particular time that I'm really consciously making conscious the role of magic in my life and in our work. So if you're on a similar path, I cannot recommend that book more. It, for me, was a real blasting off a large part of the blockage that I've had in harnessing magic. The other one that I want to recommend is I think it's Netflix. I'm never in control of how we watch things. My husband just lines up whatever we're watching, and I don't even know how it arrives on our television. Probably magic too. Anyway, the series we've just started watching is called The Queen's Gambit, and oh my gosh, I love it so much. It's real. Oh my gosh, it's got real depth and intelligence and sense of wonder and possibility. So if you haven't watched that, I would really recommend you go give that a go. The Queen's Gambit. Great acting too. So that's what I've been consuming. And then what have I been creating? And it's funny, this is probably the time where I've most had to pause and think, I feel like I've actually been creating less than I normally do. And there's lots of different reasons for that. One is I have been consuming more in terms of courses and things like that than I normally do. So my time's been quite taken up. I've also been really deep into a descent into old wounds and very much the things that we're going to be talking about in today's episode, actually. And I think over the last month in particular, my usual rate of creation has probably been much less than it ever normally is. So that was just interesting for me to notice as I came to share whatever I was going to share. So the two things I think that have continued are, firstly, Waking the Wild medicine. That's now starting in January rather than later this month. And Jonathan and I we've had a pause on that too for personal reasons. But obviously that has been kind of ongoing, and we're now really getting clear on who will be joining us, the work we'll be in together. And again, some of that will show up in the episode as I go into that, because it is very related. Ultimately, our medicine is gold that's held in shadow. So that's been one of the things that we've been creating. And then the other one was something that I'm always creating, but probably been more mindfully with the COVID restrictions and now entering into lockdown. Here in the UK, we went back into lockdown yesterday. And just creating ways to connect to my soul, even in these times. And so we're very lucky where we live here. We're surrounded by countryside, so there's no restrictions for us in terms of being able to still commune with the wild and all the way I normally do. But I think there is, and I did an episode with Lucy H. Pearce on this last week. It's not out yet. I recorded it with her last week. But we were talking about how a lockdown externally can create a bit of like a lockdown internally in terms of our creative flow, which I think I've seen that show up with my friends, and I think to an extent with myself too. So it's finding ways to continue into that creative flow even though there's places that we are going to have these blocks because of restrictions. And so just as an example, if one of the ways that you stay in that flow is to act on inspiration, I don't know, to go and see a play or to go to a museum or, I don't know, meet an artistic friend, there could be restrictions on those things. So it's recognizing like that doesn't mean we just have to kind of lock down altogether and stay in our homes, but finding ways that we can still be in that flow, which do really require that we keep the flow coming in. We're going to dry out very fast if all we're doing is putting out or forcing ourselves almost to kind of keep being creative when we're not able to still be in that flow coming in. So that's things that something I've been really mindful of, creating those rituals, those habits, those connections that allow me to stay in contact with soul and continue to create. Again, even though for other reasons, that it definitely has been a less creative month than usual. Okay, so those bits out of the way. And now we're going to dive into the topic of how to go into your shadow to find the gold. And as ever, this was the winning topic voted by our Facebook group members when I asked, what should I talk about the next month? This one, I think, was the clear winner, actually. There's a lot of interest in this particular topic. So I'm going to do a bit of defining and just explaining what I mean by terms as I go. So if I'm saying things like gold and shadow, and you're like, I don't even know what they are, don't worry. I will be speaking about those. And even if you are familiar, honestly, there isn't a probably like absolute agreed definition on any of these things. So I'm going to share my own sense of these words and this work. And when I say my own, I really mean, that's mine and Jonathan's together. This is a body of work that he and I have spent many years creating. So even if you do know those terms, you may well learn something just in the way that I'm talking about it or the way that we work with it. So either way, you'll, I'm sure, get something out of it, no matter how familiar you are or unfamiliar you are with everything I'm about to speak about. So we shall talk initially about shadow. What am I even talking about when I talk about shadow? And so the simplest way to understand this really is it's any aspect of a person that's not in their conscious awareness. So a part of a person, a trait of a person, a way of being that is out of awareness. We don't have it. We don't have a conscious relationship to it. So that's a kind of really simple way of just seeing it's something that's kind of out of sight. It's pushed away out of sight. It's not in my conscious awareness. And why would that be? Why would we have parts of ourselves that aren't in our conscious awareness? Well, for almost all of us, it'd be very, very unusual if what I'm about to say isn't the case. But for most of us, the wounds that we've received as children, and when I talk about wounds, that could be obvious traumatic events, or it could be ongoing conditioning, ongoing ways that we are related to, particularly by our main caregivers. So it's ways that we've been shown is appropriate to behave. So when I talk about conditioning, that largely is what I'm talking about. But either way, let's just generically call them wounds. And these wounds show us that it's dangerous to behave in certain ways or to exhibit certain traits, to express ourselves in certain ways. And so if we talk about it as a behavior, a certain way of us behaving either attracts harm to us, or the behavior creates a rejection of us to an extent. It may not be a complete rejection, but we may kind of recognize there's a disappointment or a pulling away from our parents when we behave a certain way. Either way, whether it's like a direct sense of kind of, oh, when I'm like this, I'm hurt, or when I'm like this, I'm rejected. Either way, we have this sense like this part of me is dangerous. And if you really sort of tracked it back, if we join the dots back, ultimately it's dangerous to our survival. It's dangerous at the level where we're whether we're rejected to the point where we're kind of alone, or whether we're treated in a way that is like, ultimately so dangerous it kills us. That is like a threat to our survival, but we won't often relate to it that way. We won't consciously know, oh, by me being like this, it's a threat to my survival. All of that's out of our conscious awareness too. So what happens, and again, none of this is a conscious choosing level, it's just what's happening in the background as a way of keeping us safe and alive. We react to those wounds and we take those parts of ourselves, those ways of being, those traits, and we shove it away into shadow where it won't have other people reject or harm us. So I'm hoping that makes sense so far. Let me just pause and see if there's a way of me just throwing a bit more light onto that. So it could be, and I'll give more and more examples as I go, but it could be a way that we show up where we are told we're too much, too loud, too boisterous. And so that part of us we recognize has us rejected. It creates an unwanted reaction in people who love us. So that would be something that we then shove down into shadow outside of our conscious awareness. And if those things just stayed there and didn't do anything, of course, firstly, that'd be a very short show, but also it doesn't quite work like this. Is not as nice and simple as that, unfortunately. Maybe not unfortunately, because again, there's gold there. But those parts don't just sit there doing nothing. What happens is whatever's in shadow will then create how you're showing up in life, but in a unconscious and distorted way. I mean, simply put, we could say that pretty much every unwanted or unhelpful way that you've thought or felt or behaved has come from what's in shadow. It really is as powerful as that over our life experience. I'm going to read a quote here by a psychologist and author called Robert Johnson. He's in the Jungian tradition. And he writes really beautifully about the relationship between gold and shadow, probably better than I'd say any other in that tradition that I know of anyway. There's lots of writing about shadow, but specifically Robert Johnson's beautifully articulate on the topic of gold. Not that this quote references gold, but it talks very clearly to what we're talking about here about shadow. The shadow is that which has not entered adequately into consciousness. It is the despised quarter of our being, often has energy potential nearly as great as that of our ego. If it accumulates more energy than our ego, it erupts as an overpowering rage or some indiscretion that just slips past us. Sorry, my throat went funny then. Or some indiscretion that slips past us. Or we have a depression or an accident that seems to have its own purpose. The shadow gone autonomous is a terrible monster in our psychic house. So again, it doesn't sit there nice and neutral and doing nothing. It actually has great, great power to affect how we're showing up in life. And that word terrible monster, I think, is also really helpful to recognize. Like, yes, it can look like monstrous behavior, but ultimately this is going back to that childhood part of us, that innocent, beautiful child who was wounded. And so it's really helpful to kind of keep that sense of compassion about this. This isn't some, awful part of you. It's ultimately a child part of you. And where you were wounded as a child is, of course, those same places that as an adult, you're going to be closing your heart and hurting yourself and others. It's how would you do otherwise? It's completely innocent and understandable. If your wounds have taught us it isn't safe to be open in the world because we'll be hurt, of course, that's how we're going to then show up as adults. So it's really important to recognize the innocence in this. Another quote that I love is by another psychologist, James Hillman. And he said, the wound and the eye are one and the same. And what he means by that is how we were wounded, that wound that we have about ourselves, about the world, is also how we're going to see the world as an adult. We're seeing the world through the wound. And again, completely outside of our conscious choice when all of this is outside of our conscious awareness. When I say all of this, I mean the way this shows up, the fact that we can even do something about it. So the great news is, once we do start to have this awareness, there is something we can do about it. But until that happens, it is very, very powerful, but innocent in terms of how it's going to affect our behavior and our lives. So hopefully I've made a good case that there's like a very good reason to do something about what's been held in shadow, which is where shadow work comes in. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. But before we do that, let's talk about the good stuff, because we've talked about monsters and this horrible behavior. What's also held in shadow is the gold, which really is the point of this episode. So very simply put, the parts of us that are in shadow are often our greatest gifts. I'm going to say that again. Often what's shoved down into shadow, and I'd actually say, my personal feeling is it's always our greatest gifts. Not everyone would necessarily agree with that. So I'm just going to say like often, just to not get everyone sort of so kind of like, really, can that be true? I'm not necessarily saying it is true. It's just been my experience that really all of what's in shadow is our gifts. But let's just say most of the time, what's in shadow are our gifts. But they've been so distorted by shame that even if awareness is shone there and we start to get a sense of in shadow, it's going to be really, really hard initially to recognize them as such. It's going to be hard to see this thing that we've been told is really awful about ourselves and is going to get us hurt or rejected. How the hell could that be a gift? It's going to be very difficult initially to see that. So that's why I think it's so, so helpful to be able to talk about these things in this way, where we're constantly talking about both that kind of unwanted part of us and why we put it there, but the very fact that it's also gold. It's also something that has real deep value for us and for those around us. I think just trusting that's the case in itself makes this work so much more hopeful and loving. I think it's such an important lens to have on this. Like, this isn't just awful stuff down here. It's awful only in that it's been distorted by shame and it's actually gold. Another great quote from Robert Johnson was, "Some of the pure gold of our personality is relegated to the shadow because it can find no place in that great leveling process that is our culture." And that's going to be true for all of us. But I find it specifically so true with the people that are drawn to work with us, the ones that we say have that potent medicine. Often the form that takes is very unwelcome in this culture. It's going to be those ways that doesn't fit particularly well with the kind of, nice, neat boxes, nice rows of how we do things. It's really not going to fit well with that. So I really noticed that a lot of what gets relegated to shadow for the people that are drawn to work with us is because culturally it wasn't a great fit. And again, really see the relationship between these parts of us, but again, particularly these people with really potent medicine for the world. As Robert Johnson said, the gold that is related to a higher calling, this gold is related to a higher calling, and this can be hard to accept at certain stages of life. So this is big stuff, big, important, powerful stuff that is held in shadow until we're ready to bring it out. So everything I'm about to say here isn't necessarily something that someone wants to dive into before they're ready. There's going to be a point where we feel very called to embody and express that deepest part of our soul. And we'll know that. Doesn't make it any less scary. Doesn't necessarily make it easier, but it'll be because it's the perfect time we're ready to express that higher calling that we came here for. I'm going to give an example of something that I see a lot with the people that we work with, which is this I guess you could name it as sensitivity. The trait itself is sensitivity. And often that's going to come in many forms. It's going to be physical sensitivity in terms of finding certain types of clothes uncomfortable, or certain types of noises or smells. But often there'll be like an emotional sensitivity too. And so the wound often is the fact that because that sensitivity isn't welcome in our culture, we're meant to kind of be able to tolerate this setup, this modern world that we've got here that has, this is how we dress. This is the products that we're surrounded by. These are the kind of noises that we're surrounded by. Like, get with the program. Being sensitive to that is actually a problem, and therefore you're too sensitive. And so I noticed that a large percentage of the people that we work with, particularly the people that come to us specifically because they have this deep magic of being some kind of change worker, most of them would have been told at some point that you're too sensitive. Certainly true for me. And from there, we shove it into shadow and then have this distorted relationship to it. Doesn't go away. Sorry. I think that happens on every Facebook Live I do. The dog decides to let himself out at some point. So as we've just seen, it doesn't go anywhere. It's still there in shadow. It now has this distorted way of showing up in our lives. And typically that will be both a overexpression and a repression. Sometimes, this is true, possibly it's true, that some people may only exhibit a repressed version of that or an overexpressed, but I'd say most of us have a bit of a mix. And so that could be, for example, shaming others for being sensitive. Like, oh my gosh, she's so sensitive. She's such a melodramatic drama queen. It could be disassociating from or numbing your own sensitivity with, various addictions, drink, drugs, shopping. When I say addictions, it doesn't even have to be a full-blown addiction, just this habitual way that we have of numbing. Quite often shows up in autoimmune systems, as in the because we're not allowing ourselves to account for this sensitivity doesn't work well in this modern world. We kind of keep it in and just make ourselves wrong for it, and it kind of attacks us. And the last way is we have these kind of eruptions where our kind of sensitivity has got to a point where it cannot just, we're not experiencing it, we're not in conscious relationship, it kind of erupts in various ways, which then of course we make ourselves wrong for. And so all of this is a great example of a Jung quote that I constantly say: until we make the unconscious conscious, it becomes our life, and we call it fate. So we end up with this experience of life that we're like, okay, well, this is my experience. And we have no idea that it comes from this stuff that's in shadow and is working its way through all of the ways that we show up, all the ways that we create our lives. So how is this that I'm talking about, this example of sensitivity, what's the gold in that? Why do I see that as gold? It's because from everything I've seen and personally experienced, every one of us who are change workers in this modern world, or would have been change workers in an Indigenous setting, so these are the healers, the psychics, the shamans, sensitivity is one of the most important tools in our bag. To do this kind of work without that kind of sensitivity, I would say, is probably not going to happen. And without that sensitivity, it's just not going to be your path. It's just not going to be what you're here to do. So until we're able to make conscious contact with that gold, with that sensitivity, we're not going to be able to fully do the work we came here to do. A lot of us probably would have felt the calling to this work. So it's not like we may have spent years resisting it, but we may have found ourselves in a job as a coach or something. But what I see over and over, until we've gone into shadow and reclaimed that gold, we are not going to be the fullest expression of our medicine that we came here to be. So that's when shadow work comes in. Okay, I'm just going to take a breather and then we're going to dive into that. So shadow work, quite simply, is bringing back into light whatever's been held in shadow. And we've just seen this is going to be parts of us that we've seen or been told is unwelcome, has been shoved into shadow, and it's going to be something that also is a gift. So we're bringing that back into awareness. And this work, for my own personal belief, like, it's not just bringing awareness, it's also bringing love. I do know of people that do work that is called shadow work in one way or another that doesn't seem to include love as a key ingredient. I'm not so sure if that creates a helpful end result, even if it's effective. For me, when we talk about awareness, I actually think we may just as well say loving awareness. I think without the love, it's just not going to have the same kind of power or efficacy, or be, I don't think it's honouring what this ought to really be. I think this work is just the most precious, intimate work we can do. And oh my gosh, if we can't bring love here, where can we bring it? So it's about bringing loving awareness to those aspects of ourselves that we have previously rejected. And simply put, anything we do to make that unconscious conscious could be described as shadow work. There is a kind of, I guess, a narrow definition of what we like is called shadow work, but really we may as well just say anything we're doing that makes the unconscious conscious is a form of shadow work. And again, all that really is how do we go into shadow to reclaim our gold? And there's actually many ways, many ways. So there's process work, which is often what is called shadow work, but also shamanic work, plant medicines, sitting in circle or council, types of expressive movement, inquiring contemplation, being conscious relationship to our dreams, and of course, something we talk about constantly on this show, a deep communion with the wild. So all of these can be, I'm not saying they're always going to be, but all of these can be a way of going into shadow and reclaiming our gold. And many of these also, you've probably noticed already, have they're very ancient traditions and rituals. These are things that we see across the world and going right back through history. These are ways that we've discovered as humans are incredible ways of understanding those unconscious parts of ourselves and bringing them to conscious awareness. So these aren't just this kind of like, oh, this seems like a nice technique that someone invented 20 years ago. These have their roots in ancient indigenous traditions. And we use almost all of those examples I just gave in combination in our work with Wake the Wild, because we see that using all of those different attributes together create this such a powerful alchemy that creates that, again, it really allows the love and the holding and the guidance that I see is so required to help people walk what can be a really challenging path. So I'm not going to go into any more detail on each of those, but whether you work with us or whether you are working with someone else, or I don't know, deciding to do a plant medicine ceremony, whatever, it's just knowing that all of these ways of making the unconscious conscious have their place. And again, best done, I think, in a way that is not just bringing awareness, but bringing love to it too. So, whoever you're working with, whatever teacher, guide, coach, shaman, whatever, I would really say, just make sure there's love baked into that in some way or another. So finally, I'm just going to end with talking about this at a kind of another level of elevation. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is becoming whole. These parts of us, these fractured parts of us, these parts of us have been hidden in shadow. You could say, well, they're still there, but they aren't this integrated whole human that ultimately I think is our birthright to become. And again, I love this Robert Johnson quote that talks to this really beautifully. generally the first half of life is devoted to the cultural process, gaining one's skills, raising a family, disciplining oneself in 100 different ways. The second half of life is devoted to restoring wholeness, and he in quotes, making holy of life. And this other part of it, we can say that that first part is often done in a way that's very unconscious, automatic, with this sense of urgency, like this is what I must do. And again, a lot of this is because we must fit in. So therefore we must find, how do we fit into this culture, into this process? And it's very outwardly focused. This second part, where we're restoring our wholeness, is very internal, very much looking inwardly to who am I and how can I best serve myself and ultimately the world. And this again is a Robert Johnson quote. Unfortunately, many Westerners are caught in just this difficult phase. And by he's saying this difficult phase, it's the phase between the two. Unfortunately, not everyone makes it. And I'd say maybe a minority make it through to that second part, that part where they are, that second part where they are able to make conscious, to restore their wholeness. And so if you're feeling like, well, I've done that first part, I've done pretty well, actually, you know, like I've fit into my culture, I'm raising a family, I'm disciplining myself, I've gained these skills. And then I feel like that's kind of no longer really serving me. I don't feel fulfilled. I feel like I'm stuck. It's because you're ready to launch into this second phase, but haven't yet just found the path. So again, many people are stuck there. It doesn't mean that you have to stay stuck there. This very much is a path that I believe, again, is our birthright and is here for all of us when we're ready. So if that's you, notice that. Like, notice, is this something that's calling to me? And it might be right now, you're not more conscious of this kind of like this big path and know exactly what it is and knowing it's calling to you. Just even if you're feeling some resonance with some of the things I'm talking about, when I'm talking about gold, when I'm talking about sensitivity, when I'm talking about that, like these different phases of life, just notice if you're feeling that call in your heart, it's your time. And again, it really isn't right for everyone at every time of their life. So if it's not calling for you right now, that's okay. It's just not yet. Or it might just be that I'm not the person to be your guide in whatever way. So that's true too. It might just be that. So just trust yourself. If you're feeling a resonance, it's because it's for you and it's for you now. The second part of this is to be intentional. A lot of our work is centered around this idea of creating things from intention. And so if you're deciding like, this is my time, decide it. Decide, I'm going to do the work. I'm going to walk the path to reclaim my gold from shadow. Make that a commitment. And so much can come from that moment where we just make a powerful decision. We don't even and I'd say not even, we don't need to know how. For the moment, put the how to one side completely. You don't need to know how to feel that call and make that a decision. The how will be revealed. The how is always revealed. The decision comes first. And then look for that next breadcrumb and take aligned action on it. So that next breadcrumb could be a book. I've mentioned several authors as I've been talking. It could be that you heard like that next breadcrumb's for me. It could be that you decide to look for someone to work with. It could be that you feel drawn to come and join us on, one of the ways that we allow people to walk down the path away from the world. So notice, what's that next breadcrumb for you? And then have the courage to take the aligned action on it. And of course, for some of you, it may well be joining us in Awakening Wild Medicine. I've mentioned quite a few times the way that particular shadow of things like sensitivity it shows up over and over again for the people that are meant to work with us, those people who are feeling this deep calling to do their soul work. So if that's you, like, you'd be so welcome to come join us. There's still some places left, and say we've just postponed it from November to January, so you've got a little bit of extra time too to have a look. And so the link for that, I'm just checking because I actually gave it out incorrectly on the webinar. I'm glad I did check. I would have given you the wrong URL again. It's primalhappiness.co/medicine. There was also a webinar that we did. If you haven't caught that, that's really worth you watching. In fact, I'll make sure that gets added to the webpage, and I'll drop it in the comments too. But if you are feeling that it could be you that we're talking to when I'm mentioning, the seers, the shamans, the change workers, go watch that webinar, because you'll really get a sense of like, oh yeah, that is actually who she's talking about. And yeah, again, I really encourage you, trust yourself. You'll know in your heart what's next for you. It will be revealed. And sometimes these breadcrumbs don't come in the form we expect them to be. So, expect to be surprised with that too. And however you decide to walk that path, you absolutely have my love and blessings. I honestly think it's the most rich and rewarding path we can walk. I'm clearly very biased, but yes, I hope you find, and I know you will find, the most beautiful gold there in shadow. So in closing, if you're watching me now live but aren't listening to our podcast, go check that out. There's, as of, I think, today's episode, 300 episodes, 300, I can't even believe it. It's released every week, and that's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. I also mentioned our group earlier. If you're not a member of our free Facebook group, come join us. It's a gorgeous place. Such an amazing mix of people, all one way or another, walking this path of rewilding themselves and actualizing their deepest gifts. And that's at facebook.com/group/primalhappiness. And if you do want to see if there's a way that you want to join us on walking this path, awaken the wild, you can go and see what we've got at the moment at primalhappiness.co/go deeper, and you'll see all the different ways you can work with us. We don't currently have any spaces for one-to-one work. Usually we're in a kind of like waiting list situation. So if you have a look at Wake the Wild Sovereign, if you are feeling called to work with us one-to-one, and at least arrange a call so that when we next have a space, which I think it's April next year, you'll be kind of first in line for that. And of course, there'll be Wake the Wild medicine there and other things that we offer throughout the year. Thank you so much for joining me. And have a wonderful Friday, gorgeous weekend, and lots of love. Bye-bye. Mwah. So that's us done for this month. I would love to know what came up for you as you listened. What did you take from this show? What you're going to commit to? A great place to share any of that is the Primal Happiness Facebook group. And the link for that again is facebook.com/group/primalhappiness. And I would also just love to have any feedback, questions, topic suggestions for future. And the group is the best place to post those too. And if you'd like to join me live for the making of the next All the Everything, you'd be very, very welcome. Just go like our Facebook page, facebook.com/primalhappiness. And you can watch out for the show airing live on the first Friday of every month. If you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes. They're at primalhappiness.co/episode 300. And if you are feeling called to the journey of waking the wild medicine, if 2021 is the year you will embody and express your deepest soul work, the place to start is to go watch the replay of our webinar on how to be your wild medicine. You can find the link to that at primalhappiness.co/medicine. But if you know one of those places is meant for you, go claim it there. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way, just like magic, you are going to get that episode straight to your device as soon as it comes out. We have, just to say, Oh my goodness. We have such a stockpile of incredible episodes with incredible guests coming out over the next couple of months. You will not want to miss them. I promise you. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.